The scream came first. It was sharp, sudden, and cut through the early morning silence of the Talwar family's apartment. When the parents, Rajesh and Nupur, rushed to their daughter's bedroom, what they saw would haunt them forever. Aarushi Talwar, only 14 years old, lay lifeless on her bed. Her throat had been cut. Her body was covered carefully with a blanket, as if someone had tried to hide the horror of what they had done. The room was eerily quiet. Nothing seemed broken. Nothing seemed stolen. It looked like a normal teenage girl's bedroom, posters on the wall, books on the desk, her school bag resting neatly on the chair. But the sight on the bed told a different story. At first, everyone thought it was the family's trusted house help, Hemraj. He wasn't in the apartment. His room was empty. The police quickly announced he was the prime suspect. People whispered that maybe he had killed Aarushi and then escaped, but the next day, everything changed. The neighbors gathered as police finally opened the locked terrace upstairs. What they found there shocked everyone. Lying in the sunlight was Hemraj himself. Dead. Killed in the same brutal way as Aarushi. The case had turned upside down. The man they thought was guilty was actually another victim. 2 murders. In the same house. In the same night, the media went wild. Reporters shouted questions outside the building. Neighbors whispered theories about secret visitors, hidden enemies, and family secrets. The police searched the apartment again, this time more carefully. But something was wrong. Evidence had been touched. Things had been moved. The crime scene wasn't clean, but it wasn't clear either. It was as if someone had wanted to confuse the investigators, and then came the detail that no one could explain. Aarushi's door had been locked from the outside. Who locked it? How did the killer move so quietly through a home full of people, and why was nothing stolen? The answers only led to more questions. The parents stood in shock, struggling to believe what had happened. The police stood in confusion, unsure where to even begin. And the public stood outside, demanding answers to a story that was quickly becoming one of the most mysterious crimes India had ever seen. But as the sun set on that second day, with 2 bodies gone and no clear suspect, a chilling possibility began to spread through the crowd. What if the killer was still close by? What if they had never really left the scene at all? The silence of that apartment wasn't just heavy. It was terrifying. And what happened next would shake the entire nation. The crowd outside the apartment had doubled by the time the rooftop discovery spread through the neighborhood. Shouts and whispers filled the hot afternoon air, and television cameras pushed closer, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. The news was out. The missing servant, Hemraj, had not run away. He had been dead all along. His body lay on the terrace, hidden under the bright Indian sun. It was a twist that no one had expected, not even the police who had searched the building earlier. The shock hit everyone at once, like the air had been sucked from the world. The mother clutched her face, sobbing, while the father tried to argue with the officers, demanding to know how such a terrible mistake had been made. The police were tense and embarrassed. Their earlier suspicion that Hemraj was the killer had suddenly collapsed like a house of cards, and then came the turning point, the moment that burned into everyone's memory. As officers bent over Hemraj's body, one of them uncovered the sheet further, and the crowd gasped. The man had suffered terrible injuries. It was not just a death, it was a brutal killing. The rooftop buzzed with panic. Someone shouted, "If Hemraj didn't do it, then who did?" The words echoed louder than the crowd itself. It was the question everyone had been waiting to ask, and now it hung heavy in the air like a curse. That was when the parents were quietly asked to step aside. The police were no longer treating them as grieving victims. They were now potential suspects. The mother's sobs turned to protests. The father's face hardened, his voice breaking as he tried to explain himself. But no one seemed to be listening anymore. The crowd downstairs, the flashing news cameras, and the whispers among the officers, all of it pointed in one dangerous direction. The suspicion had now shifted to the family themselves. The story that had started with horror was changing shape. The victim was not only the girl on the bed or the servant on the terrace. The story was now about trust broken, about secrets behind closed doors, and about a crime scene that no longer made sense. But then came the sudden scream of a reporter rushing up the stairs. She had just received a breaking update from her newsroom. Her words, shouted in front of everyone, froze the entire terrace. The police believe this is a double murder, done from inside the house. The neighbors gasped again. The parents looked as if the ground had vanished beneath them, and that was where the day turned darker. If the killer was not Hemraj, then it had to be someone else inside the house. The walls of the apartment suddenly felt tighter, heavier, and far more dangerous. The very home that had been a place of comfort was now the cage of a mystery that terrified the whole city, but the police were not done yet. They had one more discovery to reveal, one that would shock everyone again and change the course of the entire case, and that's where Chapter 2 leaves off, with the crowd, the family, and the police standing at the edge of something far bigger than they ever imagined. The rooftop discovery of Hemraj had turned the entire case upside down. What seemed like a straightforward murder of a teenage girl had now become a double murder inside the same house, and the person everyone thought was guilty, the missing servant, was suddenly a victim himself. The crowd of neighbors, reporters, and relatives could not believe it. 2 deaths in one family's home. 2 bodies within feet of each other. And yet, no one had seen or heard a thing. The news spread like wildfire. Reporters rushed to their vans, shouting into cameras about the double murder mystery in Noida. TV channels repeated the breaking headline again and again. The parents, Rajesh and Nupur, stood on the terrace, their faces pale, their eyes swollen from crying. It was as if the ground beneath them had opened and swallowed their lives whole. The police, however, were far from sympathetic. The discovery of Hemraj's body made them look careless, almost foolish. They had searched the house the day before and never checked the locked terrace door. Now, with journalists circling like vultures, the officers felt pressure like never before. Who had killed both Aarushi and Hemraj? And why were they left in such bizarre conditions? Inside the apartment, the crime scene grew colder, heavier. Arushi's room remained sealed off, her posters and books standing silently against the walls. The bed where she had been found was stripped bare, but the image of her last moments lingered in every corner. Neighbors whispered that the family's perfect life had been a mask. Some pointed fingers at Rajesh, others at Nupur. Some still whispered about outsiders, burglars, or strangers in the night. But one thing was certain, nothing about this crime fit into a neat explanation. By late afternoon, the police brought in more officers, photographers, and forensic experts. Evidence markers appeared across the apartment. Every inch was checked, every object bagged. Fingerprints were lifted, bloodstains swabbed. Yet, confusion deepened. The lock to the terrace had been broken with force that morning, but no one could agree on when or how it had been locked in the first place. Did the killer lock the door to buy time? Or was it left locked by accident, leaving Hemraj's body undiscovered? Reporters outside kept speculating. Theories grew stranger with every passing hour. Some claimed the murders were part of an honor killing. Others said it was a crime of passion. The police themselves, unsure and under fire, began pointing fingers at the family more openly. The neighbors remembered how quiet the night had been. No one had heard screams, no footsteps, no cries for help. Only silence. Some said it was impossible that such violence happened in the apartment without anyone noticing. Others argued that the parents must have known more than they claimed. As evening fell, the apartment complex lit up with the glow of camera flashes. Vans parked in every corner of the street, reporters preparing for live coverage through the night. Police officers moved in and out, carrying sealed evidence bags. The parents remained inside, sitting together in a daze, holding on to each other as though the world outside was a storm, but the storm was not only outside. It was inside the police station too. Senior officers argued about the direction of the investigation. Some wanted to pursue the servant theory further, suggesting Hemraj had accomplices who turned on him. Others believed the crime was committed by someone inside the house. In the absence of clear evidence, suspicion began to replace facts. The case was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about saving face, about pressure from the media, about the appearance of control in a story spiraling into chaos. The next morning brought no peace. The newspapers carried Arushi's smiling photos on their front pages, alongside grim shots of the terrace where Hemraj's body was found. Headlines screamed of betrayal, mystery, and brutality. Television anchors demanded justice. Politicians began commenting. Overnight, the tragedy became a spectacle. The parents now lived inside a glass cage. Every expression, every word, was caught on camera and replayed to millions. Neighbors avoided eye contact, torn between pity and suspicion. Friends whispered among themselves, unsure of what to believe. That day, police officers returned to the apartment for another round of questioning. This time, their tone was sharper. They asked about the night of the murder in minute detail. Where did Rajesh sleep? When did Nupur last see Aarushi alive? Why hadn't they heard anything? Did Aarushi and Hemraj have any conflicts? The questions piled up like stones, each one heavier than the last. Rajesh grew defensive. Nupur wept silently. The officers watched carefully, jotting down notes, exchanging glances. The more the parents spoke, the more the police doubted. Meanwhile, forensic tests came back with unsettling details. Traces of alcohol were found. Fingerprints smudged, wiped. A broken lock on the terrace, forced from inside. The case was a puzzle with too many missing pieces, and every answer only raised more questions. Late that evening, as darkness cloaked the city, a reporter whispered to his cameraman. He had learned something new. Rumors were spreading that the police now considered the parents not just witnesses, but suspects, and then it happened. On the third day after the murders, as the cameras rolled and neighbors pressed closer to the gates, the police made their move. Officers stepped out of the apartment, their faces stern, and announced in front of the flashing lights, "We are investigating the role of the parents in this case." The crowd gasped. The reporters shouted questions. Microphones pushed forward. The parents stood frozen in their door. Staring in disbelief as their names were carried into every home across the nation. The world no longer saw them as grieving victims. They were now at the center of suspicion, the terrace where Hemraj was found, the bedroom where Aarushi lay, the silence of the night. All of it was turning into a story of betrayal and secrecy, and as the shouts of reporters echoed through the street, one officer whispered quietly to another, words that were never meant for the cameras, "This is just the beginning. There is more to be found." But what more could there be? The crowd pressed closer, the cameras zoomed in, the parents' faces turned pale as the words sank in. The case was no longer a mystery in the shadows. It was a storm in the open. And somewhere in that storm, the truth was waiting, sharp and merciless. Then, as if on cue, a new sound cut through the chaos. From the apartment staircase came the echo of hurried footsteps. Another officer emerged, his face pale, carrying a small bag sealed with tape. He whispered something into the ear of the senior inspector, who stiffened at once. The inspector looked at the crowd, at the cameras, then back at the parents. His hand tightened around the bag. "Another discovery has been made," he said softly. The air froze. Reporters pushed closer. The parents gasped. The crowd held its breath, and in that moment, the case took another turn, one darker than anyone had yet imagined.